of 2024, the Party for National Unity and Progress, PNUP President Highvie Hamududu, announced that his party had resolved to support President Hakainde Hichilema's candidature in the upcoming 2026 general election. Now, this decision led to the immediate resignation of the party's vice president in Kasota Singongo from the party. Mr. Hamududu stated that the president, that is President Hichilema, had revived the mining sector and introduced reforms in the energy sector. He further noted that President Hichilema's policies would significantly impact the country's economy over the next 2 years, emphasizing the need for him to continue for another 5-year term to fully transform the economy. My guest this evening joining me on Costa is the PNU President Highvie Hamududu to discuss the preparedness towards the 2026 general election and really if what he feels are transformative economic reforms by the UPND are really impacting practically on the ground. He joins me right after this. Thank you for joining us on a Sunday once again. This is Costa, with me, Costa Mwansa. You're watching us live across the SADC region in Zimbabwe, Malawi, Botswana, and Namibia. Back home in Zambia on DSTV's channel 271. On GoTV, we are on channel 20. We're streaming live on Facebook. It's Diamond TV. It's Diamond Media Zambia on Facebook, as well as Diamond TV online. On YouTube, we are on Diamond TV Zambia. My guest, the PNUP President, Mr. Highvie Hamududu. Happy New Year and thank you for coming to Costa this evening.
Happy New Year, Costa. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Great.
This must be my second time, right?
Yes, but obviously we're meeting for the first time in 2025.
Yes.
I think before we get into what is affecting us locally, I'd like to start with a few topical issues around the region. I know that having interacted with you, you spent quite a bit of time in Namibia, working there for a long time. We just received this morning news of the passing on of the founding father of Namibia, Dr. Sam Nujoma. He's been eulogized in so many ways of how from independence he managed to set a footing of Namibia onto the right economic path. Your reflections as a politician on the leadership of President Nujoma, having worked in Namibia and lived there yourself.
Wow. First of all, Costa, allow me to pass my condolences to the people of Namibia on the passing away of Dr. Sam Shafishuna Nujoma, the first president of Namibia. And they call him the founding president of Namibia. It's quite a big loss. And by the way, he is the last of our independence heroes. He is in the group of Dr. Kaunda, Dr. Nyerere, Robert Mugabe, Dos Santos, Augustino Neto, who died earlier, Nelson Mandela. That's the group. So he is really the last one of those stewards that brought the liberation, the total liberation of Southern Africa. So it's an epic moment for the whole SADC to lose such a man. And I think in Namibia, I posted somewhere that this will be the biggest funeral. He was heroic. He led the heroic liberation of Namibia successfully. Dr. Nujoma left Namibia before Zambia became independent into exile, into then Tanganyika. And SWAPO's first headquarters was in Tanzania, then Tanganyika. And then when Zambia became independent in 1964, the party office was moved in Lusaka because it was now nearer to Namibia. And the first officer here was the second president, Hifikepunye Pohamba, here in Matero, I'm told. And then later on, of course, after 1975, Angola became independent because Namibia has a longer coastline, so borderline with Angola. So the War of Liberation was fought partly from Zambia, but mainly from Angola because of the longer borderline. And through the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, for which Sam Nujoma was the commander, they achieved a long, protracted victory for the independence of Namibia, which was basically in the region, the last colony. Because later on, South Africa basically was just democracy. It was not really independence. So Namibia was the last colony within SADC to gain independence. And thanks to the help from this country.
With what you're saying, him being the last in the frontier of the true Pan-African fathers, what does this mean for the new crop of leadership for SADC, for EAC, for ECOWAS? Have we successfully passed on the baton? Do we still have the spirit, the values, the ethos of Nujoma, of Kwame Nkrumah, of KK, of Nyerere in today's leadership of Africa?
We must take a very big lesson from these stewards, from the founding fathers of our nations. They were very united for a common purpose. And to their credit, in their lifetime, they achieved the total liberation of Africa. Save for the confusion in Morocco, Sahel region, that's a localized issue. But generally, Africa became free. So the meeting they had at the founding of OAU, and by the way, Dr. Sam Nujoma was there as a young person leading SWAPO in Addis Ababa when OAU, Organization of African Unity, was formed. And they purposed there under the leadership of Nkrumah and the Nyereres that they must liberate Africa. And by the time these colleagues were now leaving, Africa was totally liberated. Ours is economic liberation. And therefore, what our leaders must learn now is common purpose, unity of purpose, to liberate our people from the economic malaise.
Which brings me to the next point. Yes, 60 years after the colonial and independence struggle, the formation of the Organization of African Unity, which is now the AU, Africa in still economic doldrums. But it's very worrying that in the last 3 weeks, the pictures we begin to see out of eastern DRC, Kivu, Goma, and the threats of intent for M23 rebels to march onto Kinshasa. SADC and East African community leaders converged in Tanzania yesterday. President Hichilema was part of that meeting. Is this not sad reading for Africa, that Africa starts fighting Africa?
Exactly. My first point really is after independence, that having been achieved successfully by our founding fathers, we should have united for the post-independence struggle, Marshall Plan. But this was a war, yeah? This was a war, just like after the World War, that there was a Marshall Plan to reconstruct Europe from the destruction. And some of the creation of some institutions like, for example, World Bank, the International Bank for Reconstruction, were actually, bedrocking that reconstruction. But in Africa, after the liberation struggle, we did not successfully, deliberately craft the post-liberation struggle reconstruction. Because there's also destruction, like Zambia suffered, and most of these countries, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Angola, infrastructure was destroyed. We should have cooperated to work together. And it's not too late now. Coming to the issue of what's happening in DRC. DRC has been problematic from the very beginning. From the time Patrice Lumumba was brought down, and one of the first stewards, the Prime Minister then of DRC, Congo has been a problem. And I'm happy that leaders are meeting. And now SADC together with East Africa coming together and see how the wars in DRC can come to an end.
But it purely ties into the fact that It is the duty of you, the generation of African leaders, to emancipate African citizenry from neo or economic, colonialism. And scribes have it, reason have it, that there will never be peace in the DRC or Zaire then, because this is probably the world's most endowed country on earth, with minerals vast from everything you need.
Well, but with the political will, first of all, by the Congolese themselves. First of all, Congo is a sovereign nation. So the Congolese themselves must purpose in themselves to find a lasting solution. Because no one is winning. No one is winning. People are dying. There's no future for young people, and the women are affected. The old people are moving from one place to the other, and therefore, within themselves, they must sit down and take ownership of their country and unite across their divides. I can tell you, for example, one of the countries that did one of the wonderful things is Nigeria. Nigeria began with some rough patches at the beginning, the Biafra War and so on and so forth. But to the credit of Nigeria, deliberately they federated their countries. Now, it's still unitary Nigeria, but taking advantage of the uniqueness, they went federal. And that federal architecture of Nigerian governance system is bedrocking that stability. South Africa is one of them. That is not a total federal state, but it has some level of federalism. That within the provinces, you have provincial governments, and therefore governments are closer to their people. I suppose that one of the ways, if Congolese agreed, is to begin to think around the best practices. Not really dictating to them, because you see, that's a huge country to be managed fully from Kinshasa. DRC is so huge, and therefore let them see how they can learn lessons, say from Nigeria, from South Africa. Remember, before the independence of South Africa, before the democratic elections of 1994, we had issues of the KwaZulu-Natal violence and so on and so forth. But because of the good constitution that distributed the powers to the provinces and to the grassroots, those excesses and some of the intimations to come out of South Africa, we are literally buried, because now people are breathing through their localized governments. And therefore, the DRC question requires a deeper study and also learning from what other countries have done. If DRC issues are not resolved, Costa, SADC and General Central Africa cannot develop, because we need each other.
Are you confident with the current capacity of the African Union, SADC, EAC, that these matters will be resolved with an African solution? It's been done before. This country played a huge role during Dr. Chiluba's time in trying to bring the Kabila factions. We played roles in Angola with UNITA. Can we find an African homegrown solution?
Yes, and I'm very happy with the position of government, and Zambia must remain mediatory. Okay? We must not be involved in the war. We must always remain mediators. And that's what happened during the Second War, in Congo. That brought in Laurent Kabila, and later on Laurent Kabila was killed, and then we had another wave of violence, and therefore Zimbabwe, Namibia, and Angola formed a force to go and protect first of all Laurent Kabila, and then Joseph Kabila, and therefore the meetings like what was there in Dar es Salaam is a good thing. So our leaders are continuing from what our forefathers were doing. That as SADC meeting, as SADC East Africa and Africa begin to meet to discuss a common problem, because DRC is our neighbor, and therefore the problem with DRC is also our problem. Like the president says, instability in DRC is instability also within our countries. So that, for me, having that meeting in Dar es Salaam was a positive step.
Let's take a bite at still burning issues on the global scene out of Africa. President Donald Trump being inaugurated on the 20th of January, since he came into office, signed over 100 executive orders. The last 3 weeks have been awash with how Donald Trump and his administration have shaken global geopolitics, shaken and disrupted the geoeconomic dynamics. Africa, Zambia inclusive, not left alone. He's pulled out of major, global organizations, the World Trade Organization, NATO, UN, the World Health Organization. He slapped tariffs on China, steering into a global tariff war. But most affected is aid, towards Africa. Zambia not, spared. Over 2,000 employees, we're told, losing their jobs under the USAID Development Partnership, the health sector, programs to do with democracy and development, so much. What does this mean for U.S.-Africa, U.S.-Zambia relationships? What is your take?
First of all, generally for Africa and other developing countries, this is a wake-up call. There has been many calls post-independence, and of course in many developing countries, that it is high time we came out of aid. We were weaned out of aid. Our countries cannot perpetually depend on aid to provide for its people. Perhaps we have stayed too long on aid dependency, and this has come quite abrupt, and that is American money. The rest we can only dialogue. We can only dialogue, but suffice to say, Africa and Zambia in particular, we have overstayed in debt. And that's why economic reforms are important, so that we create our own growth, because growth is what provides for our people. You cannot provide in an economy that's not growing. And this is some of the issues we'll be discussing. Why, for example, we are supporting the UPND Alliance for 2026. The economic reforms that bring about growth, economic recovery and therefore growth, is what is the answer to aid dependency.
Are you then in support that this is the right move, and then you're outlining part of the clinical reaction that Africa must be taking, but are we in a position to react immediately?
Yeah, but you see, we are so used to this aid, which was not correct, because we've been independent generally as Africa. Even Namibia, which got independence recently, has been independent for over 30 years, and therefore we should have weaned ourselves from aid. And here we are, we have faced a blackout, and therefore something we should have done when things were comfortable. We'll have to do it in tears. So we have to face it. This has happened. We have to face it. The rest we can only negotiate. That's American policy. We must respect it. Anything else we can only negotiate with Americans, maybe to have a gradual withdrawal.
The true picture on the ground is that obviously this is happening at a time where we're trying to implement the 2025 national budget. We know that in the most recent past, we have tried to win ourselves of direct aid support in the budget. I think that has been reduced, the last I checked, to even below 12-13%. But the 2025 budget, first of all, is non-concessional. It is tied to an IMF program that sees very little room in terms of growth. Our growth projection is below 3% in terms of GDP. Partnerships like the USAID were helping in so much of government projects, delivering healthcare, delivering education, delivery in commercial or commerce reforms. How do we then reposition ourselves when our resource envelope is very minimal?
I must say, Costa, that if the reforms that have been undertaken in the last 3 years did not happen, and we have this blackout from the US, we're going to be in a worse situation. Thank God, by the time this unfortunate situation has happened of the US withdrawal of aid, we are on the IMF program, supported the program. And this has a lot of benefits. We are now accessing the concessional window. the confidence in our economy has improved. And therefore, by numbers, investment is increasing. In mining, in energy, eventually in other sectors. So the backbone issues. And then debt restructuring basically has been done. Imagine, Costa, if we were not on an IMF program and we had not done debt restructuring and the US withdraws aid the way they have done, our situation could have been worse, far much worse. I cannot even imagine. And therefore, these reforms, we Zambians must begin to read the implication of the positive implication of these reforms, because they attack the underlying causes of our problems, and eventually we are getting to the root problem and addressing the root causes and putting reforms that eventually begin to bring growth. Because at the end of the day, it is growth that will win us from aid.
Let's talk about that growth and the reforms that you're talking about. The UPND as a party in government has now been in power 4 years, we must say. This is 2025. In August, there will be 4 years. Can these reforms move quicker? And let me break it down. The ordinary person watching you tonight will disagree that, yes, we have an IMF plan in place. But what this debt restructuring has only done is to defer the debt that we had and given a room for us to pay it in smaller chunks at a longer period, granted. But the growth that you emphasize on the local market is not happening. People are grappling with the high cost of living. You're clapping over.
I can tell you, Costa, by 2021, our problems, economic problems as a country, were so deep. The debt was huge. And you see, people don't know the cause of the high cost of production and invariably the high cost of living. There are underlying causations. One of which is debt. I want to tell you, whether I won elections, miraculously the last election, or anyone else, the cost of living was going to continue going up because it is already in motion.
Even if the PF had been returned?
Oh my goodness. First of all, in 2011, what was the price of mealie meal? 35? 25 kg? What was the exchange rate? About 5 kwacha per dollar. What was the price of fuel? About 7 kwacha per liter. But the moment we began borrowing, the borrowing began to destroy the macroeconomic foundation. Therefore, exchange rate began to weaken. The cost of production began to go up because we are an import-dependent economy. And because of that, the cost of living has been going up right from that time. How do we stabilize the cost of production? Because that's the sequence. And therefore, the cost of living is to go to the underlying issues that underpin our economy.
But without being technical, not to draw you away from your point, if you say that in 2011, the PF found fairly good, prices and a low cost of living, so they are to blame for borrowing and escalating these prices. The same is the argument today, that in 2021, we were buying mealie meal cheaper than we're buying today. In 2021, we were buying petrol cheaper than we are buying today. In 2021, we're buying electricity cheaper than we are buying now.
Because, first of all, the economy was already infected. So the disease continues until you go to the cause of the disease and cut it from there.
But we were promised that an antidote to these problems was there. It's 4 years down the line.
Costa,
the prices are not coming down.
When there is a change of government occasioned, for example, by a bad economy, when you come in, you are beginning to recalibrate its reforms. Basically, by and large, the first few years is reforms to get to the bottom of the problem. It's like when you are sick. When you go to the hospital, the first treatment regime is to go to the cause. And some sicknesses, after finding out the cause, they'll tell you, okay, with this sickness, it will take 6 months. There are some diseases that take 6 months. And then for an economy, the lead time to recovery is not 1 year.
But why are you so confident when the actual reality on the ground is different? Yes, let's tick the boxes. The IMF program and debt restructuring has been achieved.
Yes.
We $750 million dollar debt that was supposed to be paid as a bullet will now be paid in $75 million tranches for 10 years and so on. Granted. But what the citizen wants to find out from you is, let's take energy, for example. You say you're happy with energy reforms. One of the things that we see hurting us as a country is that before we had fuel imports of about 3 months when prices would be reviewed. Now there's a review of prices every month. That is bad for cash flows. It's bad for business planning. The president himself spoke about it, that this needed to change. It hasn't happened. For the longest time as a country, we know that ZESCO's operations had not been viable. The issue of a cost service study, an increment of tariffs. This has been done. But the supply efficiency, of course, coupled with the drought, these reforms don't seem to be commensurate with bringing relief to the people.
And how I wish they can be faster. Unfortunately, it's painstaking. Let me tell you, for example, in the fuel side of it, of energy, there was a debt of about $800 million. What did they say in the Kwacha? It's billions. Okay? It's quite billions. And therefore, that's why a subsidy eventually was not sustainable. It's the cause of the debt. So you cannot run a subsidy. That creates a bigger problem. And at ZESCO, for example, ZESCO had a debt of $1.8 billion, which has since been reduced to about below 400 million kwacha, because the balance sheet of ZESCO was really bad. And one of the problems on these power issues, of course, number one is a climate change issue. Okay? And secondly, the mono source, that our energy supply was not diversified, electricity. So we are basically hydro, oriented, and therefore there was need to do reforms in the energy sector to improve the energy mix so that we're not vulnerable to hydro, because climate change is now a reality. We had a drought last year. This year it looks a bit better. In the next few years again we might have drought, and therefore to insulate ourselves against this vulnerability for dependence only on hydro, reforms have been undertaken to improve, to diversify sources of electricity. You see already Mamba, which has 300 megawatts of thermal, which is stable and is not affected by weather. Another plant being put that will give us 300 megawatts of thermal electricity. So Mamba alone will be posting.
But these are in the long term.
But Mamba is going to be switched on in the next 1 year. So this one is coming on shortly. Another project is coming again in Nazeze of 600 megawatts, which will be coming in the medium term. And then the solar projects. If you can just go on the website of ZESCO, it will show you some of the projects coming through in solar.
I will be coming to that still, because one of the things you back is the mining. And for me, energy and mining go together, because for the mining companies to grow, they depend on so much power. But I want to take you back to the fuel situation, because people out there would not say they are convinced that you touched on the $800 million debt. Is this justification why the price per litre of petrol should be at 34 to 35 kwacha? Is this justification that because subsidies have been removed, the government should not care and put citizens to the whims of the OMCs, that the pricing is only market insulated? By the way, because of our poor foreign relations with Zimbabwe and our current structure, where we're importing finished petrol products that we're passing through Zimbabwe, you know that we had to reroute through Ovar, Mozambique, which again had some civil strife. Hence, we're having pockets of fuel disruptions. But again, government seemingly has ERB has no say on the price.
Well,
It's bad policies.
Because those are logistical issues.
But logistical issues which lead to very painful costs.
Yes, temporal disruptions.
And petrol is an important ingredient in the cost of production.
But then it's not the fundamental reason for the cost of fuel. The fundamental factors behind the cost of fuel are basically two. One, the international oil prices. Thank God they have been stable. The other one is the exchange rate, occasioned by the damaged macros. When you have an economy with such a huge debt, you will have a weak exchange rate. When you have an economy that's not growing, you will have a weak exchange rate. And therefore, these reforms begin to attack eventually the exchange rate. With the moment mining is ramped up, which is happening now, the investment in energy mix is improving, reducing our vulnerability of power supply in the future, and the near future for that matter. We will have an economy that begins to grow and export and increase foreign exchange earnings, and the kwacha begins to come down. So the real leverage that we have among the two factors is the exchange rate.
I agree with you that the cost, the pump price is determined by those two factors.
Yes.
Now, the exchange rate, for simplicity's sake, will basically be strengthened on the fact that we have enough to export or sell as a country.
Yes.
But we're still in a trade imbalance. We import more than we export, so we're in a trade deficit. And I'd like to ask you, the economic experts, as a layman, doesn't it only make economic sense that if the cost of input is low, what you expect is high output? And if the cost of input is high, the inverse will happen. So if as a small business, SMEs is what largely makes the country, they're spending more on power, they're spending more on petrol, how do you expect then the economy to grow for us to build basis for exports?
So the issue is that one must understand why we got there, understand the situation now, and that we are in this because of the legacy issues that must be addressed. You said, for example, the cost of production. Zambia is an import-dependent economy, including the inputs to production. Even when some raw materials are local, but machinery and so on is imported. And therefore, the exchange rate becomes a big factor in the cost of living, in the cost of production, and therefore the cost of living. So, the reforms are beginning to attack this foundational problem. How can we earn more forex? Is to deal with the big engines of our economy. Mining, energy, transport and logistics, ICT, agriculture. And we know from the numbers that the majority of the forex comes from mining. That's how this economy was founded. This copper you see at the moment, from the time this modern economy of Zambia was started, this kwacha is a copper kwacha. It's backed by copper exports. Over 70% of our forex comes from mining, and therefore mining becomes really the backbone for now, before we diversify. And energy also comes in handy because it fuels our production. By the way, very interesting. Last year, 2024, copper production increased from 2023 to 2024 by over 100,000 tons. From 700 something to 800,000 something tons. In a year when we had a drought and low power supply, how did that happen? How did that happen, Costa? Do you know what happened? One of the reforms on energy was the issue of open access.
But open access has not, unless I'm getting you right, has not caused the increase in the output of copper tonnage?
No. What happens is that there were reforms within the mining sector by putting in place a very competitive mining regime, okay, that attracted investments. So that was supported by reforms in the energy sector. Now, this open access was such a genius idea because, look, we have less power, and then you do an open access reform, meaning the mining companies now could buy power directly from Mozambique or South Africa and just use ZESCO.
I hear you.
And because of that reform alone,
using ZESCO infrastructure,
exactly.
First Quantum Minerals, for example, I had an interview with them. They're spending in excess of $6 million on power imports per month, which again does not provide a good investment climate for an investor who expects to find solid infrastructure, power, roads,
exactly,
and so on. And let me just also lament that, yes, we have increased tonnage output at the end of 2024 to over 800,000 metric tons.
Yes.
But still not good enough for a country that has been mining for over 70 years, because at a point we were shipping out over 1 million tons and we went down.
Yes, we really reached 1 million, somewhere near there. I want to tell you something, Costa. We have been here before, and we have enough lessons as a country. At one time we owned the mines, and, took over the mines under SSCM, and this country accumulated 7 billion foreign debt, which was almost impossible to pay until we were just forgiven after reforms. And therefore, we must know what really matters. For now, if there were no reforms that provided for open access, and then these mining companies, Lumwana, First Quantum, and so on, were lining up for rationing of power from ZESCO, which had gone down because of climate change, that production would not have come through. So there were complementary reforms that helped. Even the time when we had the West drought, the West power supply in this country, mining production went up. That is ingenuity. And therefore... But
with the open access, it allows the mines to import power and use ZESCO infrastructure.
Yes.
The biggest challenge, and we had the energy minister on Diamond last week, and the pain for citizens is we are having 7 hours of power, but we're still exporting around 250 to 500 megawatts of power out. Namibia is thanking us. Botswana is thanking us for these exports. Why export when we're in a deficit?
First of all,
as part of the brilliant policies that you are commending.
First of all, Costa, within the Southern Africa power pool arrangement, that you share the power that is available. Even in Zambia, when we have little power, we also import from other countries. And when we had load shedding, when it started, really under UNIP, we didn't really have load shedding. But under MMD, it started, if you remember. Even when we had load shedding under MMD or PF, and now under UPND, we have never stopped exporting. We only minimize. Cutting exports completely will not be correct. You only minimize to prioritize your citizens. And ZESCO has scaled down exports because we have a problem here. But you cannot cut off because these countries are interlinked. Okay? For example, Caprivi Strip of Namibia, the Zambezi region of Namibia, has been supplied with power from Victoria Falls power station. At one time, actually, I remember, the rehabilitation of Victoria Falls power station was done jointly between the government of Zambia and the government of Namibia through their power companies. So we come a long way. And therefore, even Zambia, when we have a crisis, we also ask power from somewhere. And therefore, you cannot stop sharing the little that is there. That's how we've been living within the family of nations. Okay? So the good thing is that exports were reduced to prioritize Zambians, not to cut off completely. Here's the importance of this. One, we are a family of nations. Okay, we are in this together. Secondly, Zambia, in the medium term and long term, will be net exporters of power. You can even see the numbers coming through. The investment in thermal, in the medium term, will have over 1,200 megawatts just from thermal. Then hydropower stations with the good rains, our capacity is quite high. And then solar, that excess power will need to be exported. So you cannot cut off export lines. Then you endanger investments coming in the energy sector.
Have we reached a point now where we can say we are done with the cost of service study? We understand the workflow, we understand the energy mix, that the pricing of the current tariffs is investor attractive, and we've started attracting investors into hydropower to cease from ZESCO being a monopoly. The more players we have, the cheaper the product will be. Have we worked out ZESCO's infrastructure preparedness, the issue of net metering and ordinary citizens, companies and organizations, cooperatives putting solar power onto the grid?
You know, Costa, as a country, we have been behind in investing in the whole electricity value chain. Not only generation, but even capacity of the transmission lines. I can tell you one time, I was wondering, we had enough power, and then I was wondering why there was load shedding in Mwansa. And I went to speak to the area manager. He says, no, the problem here, even when you have enough power, is that the consumption has increased in this small town, that the lines cannot deliver the power that you need. It has limited capacity. So after we have invested, the investment has come into power generation, which I think good work and reforms have happened. That the government has opened up, they have put a conducive environment, the balance sheet for ZESCO is being cleaned, and therefore investment is coming in the power generation. Both, I mean, in all the different types, hydro, thermal, solar, and wind energy. The next one will be to increase the capacity of the transmission lines. And that's why you need investment. You need the right climate in the economy.
Do these policies, because we've been at it again since the 5th National Development Plan. You were in Parliament, we've been talking at this for decades.
We're just talking and not walking the talk.
Yes, but have we hit the right chord for investor attractive tariffs?
What's happening now, I think both reforms are being undertaken.
Have we hit the right tone? Are we generating investment with the correct numbers?
Exactly. The numbers can show, for example, from the energy mix drive, diversification in electricity supply, that the numbers actually can show the projects that are online, enabled by the reforms. Okay? And private sector driven, because government might not have the money. We are in huge debt. Okay? So that is happening. The next one is to address now expanding the capacity of the transmission lines. You know, Costa, we are 20 million now, and the economy has grown. There are more industries, there are more mines, and so on. And therefore, we need huge investments. And that's why some of these reforms were necessary. IMF, debt structuring, all these speak to possibilities of bigger investments in the economy.
To your point of the mines growing, this administration is projecting that the country needs to ramp up copper production and output to 3 million metric tons in the next, let me just say 9 years now, because this has been there from last year. To do this, the mines will need more excess power and the increase in infrastructure now for copper. We've been talking, so the input aspect, but value addition has been the missing link as well. Do we see this being realistically achieved when we still have not hit the right energy mix?
What is giving us hope is that last year when we had the drought, I told you, when you had the West electricity crisis, Costa, production of copper went up because of the supporting reforms in the energy sector. So these sectors are interrelated. They are not sitting in silos. And therefore with that, this year, when you look at the environment, you had some reasonably good rains. Of course, the rivers might not get full because really the drought was severe last year. So even the hydro will be a bit reasonable, especially the power stations along Kafue. The mainland river is doing well. So Iteshiteji, Kafue Upper, Kafue Lower will be giving some reasonable power, supported with thermal electricity and one that is coming through in Mamba, and also the new solar projects. One is going to be opened now in Chisamba here, of about 100 or 200 megawatts. Those are additions to the to power provision that is necessary to drive the mining sector. So the mining sector also can access cheaper power, like you said, of getting expensive power through the open access. But open access is still there to improve flexibility of power access by mining companies. And I can tell you now, with this, because what is happening now gives us hope. The indicators. If copper production increased last year when we had the West drought and the West electricity crisis, this year we'll have better electricity, mid-year going onwards into next year. And therefore, it goes without saying that copper production will go up. And I want to tell you something which is exciting, Costa. With these reforms, By 2026 going onwards, the analysts, not Zambians, independent analysts, looking at the reforms that are taking place in this country and the investments coming through, their projections are that between 2026, 2027, 2028, 2029, up to 2031 there, Zambia will be one of the fastest growing economies in sub-Saharan Africa due to these reforms taking place. So it doesn't show immediately. It's bold decisions and painful, and we understand, and I really sympathize with the Zambian people of the high cost of living. The government is getting to the root cause. Increased mining production, which underpins the exchange rate, will begin to lower the cost of production, and therefore investment begins to flow into agriculture, in communication, in transport and logistics, into ICT, into wholesaling and retailing, and all these that we are doing, into tourism. So they are the first enablers that we need to do.
But do these reforms essentially, and if they do, when, that's the biggest question, benefit the citizen at the bottom line? Because yes, open access, yes, investment into solar, yes, investment into hydro, but the cost of this power for the end user is still expensive.
Indeed.
For little businesses, SMEs that need to grow in Zambia, all of us doing business, we want cheaper power, cheaper petrol. Even the policies, for example, with the issue of Indeni and Tazama, because we know that at least on the diesel side, we are managing that. But there's these cries, for example, policies on this private firm, agrofuel, and how the Tazama is being managed. The cost is still high. So if you're saying the policies are working, when do they get to benefit the small business?
Exactly. Let me tell you something. It takes a little longer. Economic experts will tell you that reforms of 5 years show in the next 5 years if the economy is quite damaged. Look, we wanted to get on IMF program from 2017. It only became possible in 2022 or somewhere there. Had we gone on IMF program there, because the IMF program supports your reform agenda, and also you access cheaper money to fill the gap, this economy would not have come this low. Debt restructuring, which, for example, as you say, deferred payments, creating the fiscal space for government to meet its obligations. I can tell you that if all the money was going for debt payments, the cost of living will go through the roof. It will be worse off. But now government still spends money, you understand, eh? Because government spends money and the SMEs are benefiting. Now, when you are funding education, you are funding suppliers, you are paying teachers, they are buying things from the shops. So there's a multiplier effect. When mining production begins to go up like it is starting. Now, the issue is what you must ask, Costa, is that, is there increment? That's what must give you hope. There's increment coming in mining. There's increment coming in energy. There's increment occasioned by debt restructuring, because with deferment of making it lighter to pay the debt, is that you can have more money now to spend at home. If this money was just there, we're going to have in a West cash crunch in this country. I can tell you, even your adversary are going to drop because people are not going to have money. And therefore, while these decisions happening, with this deferment, at least government is spending money, and that money has a multiplier effect on the ground. But with the increments coming through, I've told you already, the incremental effect will begin to show. For example, the exchange rate, the silver bullet to deal with the exchange rate is increased exports led by mining, and of course other growing sectors.
But if you say the numbers are showing, but the exchange rate is not coming down, how do you explain that?
Copper production only increased.
Yes,
by 100. Wait a minute.
If the figure says it's 150,000 metric tons, the economy is getting stronger, there's open access, and all these things you're applauding, it should show in the macros.
You know, when you are sick and you have a fundamental problem, and the temperature is high, and the other indicators, it takes time, even when you are under treatment. So it takes time. It can't just happen overnight. Who did it?
Yeah,
let me tell you, for example.
But it's 4 years. Let
me tell you, for example. Can I tell something?
It's 2.5 years since the IMF, signing of the debt restructuring. The question I have for you is, if there's investor confidence, like you claim, because of this IMF project, there's good policies in energy, mining production is increasing, and like you're saying, the numbers are showing. Why isn't the exchange rate then strengthened? Why isn't it coming down?
The issue is that...
Why is inflation going up?
The quantums, you can go to look at the trade figures, that the increment are not huge enough yet to have an impact. It takes time. So we need to reach above 1 million tons towards 2000. That's why most forecasters are saying it is 2026 onwards that this will begin to take the right effect on the exchange rate. Let me give you an example. The super pit in Lumwana. The Lumwana, that open cast mine is the biggest in Africa. Now it's even becoming bigger. There is investment going on there. About $2 billion being invested for expansion. Production only starting in 2028. Mining is expensive and long term. The new discoveries, for example, the biggest discovery, like cobalt, in Chirabombwe, the production is only envisaged in 2028. So the bigger things are coming, but the planting is happening now. It's like maize. You can't plant maize now and start eating after 7 days. You need to wait until 3 months.
Granted, so you talk about those investments within the mining sector.
Yeah.
My cry, which you've alluded this whole interview, is what incentivized or positive policies for the ordinary person on the ground, the person running a business in Soweto, the person wanting to run business within Comesa, the person wanting to do a small factory in Mumbwa Road, the person wanting to do pineapple in Winilunga. Because the policies that we're seeing under this UPND administration are just, high taxes then to cushion the budget deficit. It's policies that are wind on the high cost of production, like I've already demonstrated.
Indeed, no one is happy with the high cost of living. When they sympathize.
So what's the policy?
No one is happy with the high taxes. The issue is that the tax base is too narrow. Few people are paying taxes, and therefore
you're overtaxing those few people.
And therefore, but the budget has to run, and then we need to service debt. Now Zambia is beginning to service debt. So
won't these small businesses die at the expense of waiting for 2028?
No, they won't. Let me tell you something. We have been here before. In 1991, there was a change of government occasioned by the high debt of 7 billion. A good government, really. UNIP was removed from power. I think it was a good government. But the debt, which brought about the high cost of living, we were there before. I was in university. That time, the cost of living was skyrocketing, pushed by the debt. And the MMD took us to painful reforms. Some people might be young. The 1990s were very painful, Costa. And through those reforms, of course, a few mistakes were made, but generally the principle was correct. By 2000, that was beginning to show. By the time President Mwansa came in, he benefited from the reforms of Chiruva and Penza. Sometimes those who do reforms might not even be there when it shows. Look, when President Mwansa came in, already there were reforms in the mining sector. Private capitals began to come in. And there was an attractive, maybe I can say over-generous tax regime. And production just began to go up. Lumwana mine, which was seen to be uneconomical, because of the low grade. But the right fiscal regime, which was attracted that Lumwana mine, and it opened. And by 2006, 8, 7, 8, 9, it was beginning to show. So what you saw under Mwanawasa was a seed planted a little area, even debt write-off. It didn't just happen from nowhere. It was answering to the reforms that we had done. That, listen, we have paid enough price, can we be forgiven? And also, just to conclude on that one. So, debt restructuring, debt write-off, which was some kind of restructuring, happened because of what was put in and also supported by IMF. Allow me briefly, just to even Dr. Kaunda, in 1986, when the economy went off by 1980, experts said that Kaunda should have begun the reforms, liberalizing the economy. He was a bit late. Brought in IMF in 1986. And then he protested. He came out of IMF, withdrew actually. The economy became worse off. 88, he went back to IMF. It was too late, and he lost elections. And therefore, we were there before. There are reforms that must be undertaken, and sometimes painful. And people must understand that the right treatment is happening for the better situation tomorrow. I can tell you, if you go to hospital, a fake doctor will give you Panadol and hide the actual problem. A good doctor will take you to the theater and operate you.
Finally, as we conclude, you obviously, like I said at the beginning, have decided that you're not standing in 2026. You're rallying behind the presidency of your partnership with the UPND, saying they've put in place good policies. There is a notion, or rather a wave on the ground that others don't see from the same lens that you're seeing, that these policies are not working. They describe the UPND as a one-term, government because of the hardships they've caused the people of Zambia. They've failed to deliver on their campaign and electoral, promises. They've also been accused of trying to mutilate good civic democracy by interfering in the existence of opposition political parties, mutilating checks and balances in parliament. The current, or just recent by-elections in Petauke, Pambashe, what does this mean where even the Tomse alliance with the new Congress party begin to scoop seats? Is there hope that Zambians believe in the UPND to continue beyond 2026?
Yeah, the issue is that the government will have to work with the people, explain the reforms clearly so they understand. I can tell you, for example, Costa, despite these reforms, the CDF has been increased to a level which is unprecedented. The issue is us at the grassroots to ensure that it works. At least central government has provided, the policy has provided, the money has been provided. Free education at least up to grade 12, and increasing bursaries in public universities is increasing. Social cash transfer, cash for work. So even under this difficult macro situation, government is able to put these social safety nets. It is up to us at the grassroots to begin to ensure that the institutions, the councils, and all the institutions that are mandated to implement these things do the right thing. And therefore we must ask for accountability for CDF so that our people, in this difficult time, they can find relief. So there are programs. All that is needed is efficiency in delivery. And talking about the hardships, Costa, you have mentioned here, this has been a developing story. From the time we went into debt and it began to muzzle the mining sector, which had gone down. Remember, Mopani, KCM, the bigger guys were non-functional. Had we continued, Costa, the trajectory of 2011 under MMD, and I must tell you that I wish it was in my powers, MMD should have won 2011. Had we continued with those policies of 2011, the economy was on the threshold of economic takeoff. Everyone actually can testify that under MMD we used to feel the money. That was the result of the reforms. The time of Mwansa and the RB, the fruition of the treacherous reforms were beginning to show. So we were there before. And these reforms that are undertaken are even much better than the pre-2011 policies, because now we are better informed.
President Highvie Hamududu, thank you so much for coming through to Costa this evening, and we'll definitely have a chat with you again before 2026.
Costa, it's always a pleasure for your punchy interview.
That does it for tonight. My guest has been the president of the Party for National Unity and Progress, Mr. Highvie Hamududu, discussing obviously the global, regional, and of course national economic dynamics en route to 2026, breaking down reforms both in the mining and energy sector, and obviously his perspectives on what needs to be done. Remember, it's Diamond Media Zambia, and of course Diamond TV Online on Facebook, Diamond TV Zambia on YouTube. Thank you so much. Good night, and God bless.